Hi, this is Carmel here with chapter 3 of Millionaire Next Door. I'm here to talk to you about the chapter that's called Time, Energy, and Money. And basically, what this chapter is about is letting you know that you cannot, that wealth is basically not an accident, that people who are wealthy plan to be wealthy, that you cannot just wake up one day, work your way to wealth, get this awesome job, get highly educated, and just think that you're going to be wealthy. That people who are truly wealthy in this country, for most people, the average person, that they actually have to plan to become wealthy. And how? It's based on them using their time, their energy, and their money appropriately. So let me go into these three concepts. All right. First of all, we'll start with money. All right. Money is the easiest. Why? Because of the fact that in the end, you would assume that if I have a higher salary, that I'm able to save more, that I'm able to invest more, and therefore I have a better chance of becoming wealthier, right? And you would assume on the vice versa, on the flip side, that the less money I have, the less I'm able to save, and the less I'm able to invest, and therefore my chances of becoming wealthy are slim. But what we're finding is that that's not necessarily the case, that there are many examples of people who are known as PAWs, which the book highlights as a prodigious accumulator of wealth, and that there are many people who are UAWs, which the book highlights as an underachiever of wealth. And basically, if I break down what those two concepts are, a prodigious accumulator of wealth is basically someone, for example, that's born or poor, that basically has a career or a job that they're making, very little bit of money. And yet, for whatever the reason, that they're able to save and invest more, and not to say whatever the reason, because chapter 3 teaches us that they planned very well, despite their very limited resources. They were able to save and invest more. And therefore, let's say even with their $30,000 a year salary, they were able to turn that $30,000 a year salary, save and invest. And then, 20, 30 years down the line, they've got $1.2 million. Meanwhile, you've got on the flip side, the person who was the successful dentist, and they're turning around and they're making, $160,000 a year, $200,000 a year. You would expect that they'd be able to have a lot more money saved and invest. And come to find out, 20, 30 years down the line, they've only got $30,000, $40,000 to their name, between savings and investments. So this is what the book highlights as an under accumulator of wealth, or UAW. So the question is why? How come this typically tends to happen? And in the book, chapter 3, they focuses on two main reasons. First goes back to the reason that we talked about in the last video, chapter 2, with the consumption. And unfortunately, people who are prodigious, not that, people with who are higher income earners, unfortunately, they tend to have career fields in which people tend to have these expectations of them. Or even if the people don't have the expectations, there's the perception that people have these expectations of them. And what do I mean? That if I'm a lawyer, right? People expect me to look a certain way. If I come in with a hoodie, regular jeans, or sweatpants, even if I have a suit and it's not of the highest quality, look like a $99 off the rack suit, then a lot of times people fear that their clients are going to look at them like, this person looks not much better than I do. How do I really know that they are making that much money like they're supposed to be? And if they're not making that much money, then that kind of indicates that they're not good. And therefore, do I really want that person defending me as a lawyer? So all of these thoughts are going on through their mind. And so then the lawyer feels the pressure almost to look the part. And because the lawyer feels the pressure to look the part, then in essence, He's going to dress the part. He's going to drive the part. He's going to watch, meaning have the watch that plays the part. And so while he's doing all of that, he's going to take a client out to the restaurant that plays the part, if that all makes sense. And while he's doing that, what is all of that slowly doing to his net worth? Tick, 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 tick. It's decreasing it, you know? And so with that in mind, this is the problem that the lawyer faces, that he has to spend to look the part. And I agree with that to a certain degree. I remember when I was in real estate, I literally upgraded my car and upgraded my phone because I said, hey, I can't be going around taking clients from point A to point B, in a car, that's busted and a phone that wasn't a smartphone and couldn't do a lot of the functions that I wanted or needed to do. And that was just kind of, embarrassing to the client. Said they're going to look at me, think she's not making any money, not want to do business with me. And it's only in hindsight where I realized how stupid that was, because first of all, there's a stat that talked about the average real estate agent makes about $30,000 a year. So first of all, how can a real estate agent afford all of these things and these expectations that we of glamour that we have on them? First of all, that's unrealistic. And second of all, you're basically paying to play. And these things don't have any tangible rates of return. So with that in mind, that's the first problem. Whereas someone who's in a lower income field or a field that's not considered a professional field, let's say if I'm a plumber or electrician, I can walk in with a hoodie. I can walk in with jeans. I can walk in with, if I'm going to an event where I do have to get dressed, with the cheaper suit, because nobody expects that of a plumber or electrician. So they have the advantage of being able to not spend their money that way. The second the biggest problem, though, is what chapter 3 focuses on, is the planning part. This is what's missing. So the person who has less money, therefore, is in a position where if they know that they want to be financially free, they're going to have to seriously sit down and plan for it. How am I going to make this penny become a quarter? How am I going to make this quarter become $1? And so on and so forth. And by doing that, then now they're being forced to plan for it. And so with that in mind, and it's possible, you've got situations all the time where, a janitor who was barely making any money, or was making minimum wage, turned around and was able to accumulate $1.2 million before the time they died. So how? It comes down to basic rules, such as, for example, paying yourself first. Anyone who expects to be a prodigious accumulator of wealth, they have to use their money. They have to find ways to make their money work for them. And so they cannot spend everything that they have. They have to plan to set aside some of their money to be able to use to save and to invest. So this is where the planning comes from. It's not by happenstance. The average wealthy person saves and invests at least, and that's at least 10% of their income, whatever income they earn. At least, the number becomes really, really increased as the wealthier they become and the more encouraged they become, but at least. And so the pay myself rule doesn't mean, hey, I'm going to take my money and use it for a vacation, use it for a car because, hey, I work hard for this money. No, you're putting that money aside and making sure that before even a single bill gets paid, before you spend on a single want or even need, that in the end, you're making sure that you're taking care of you by saving and investing that money. And I'm going to talk to you about why the investments is extremely important in a moment. So that's what helps them to become a prodigious accumulator of wealth. Whereas on the flip side, someone who's already a high income earner, they think, I got the money to burn. No, once again, chapter 3 teaches us if you do not plan appropriately with your money, soon the money that you have will soon be gone. And that's what happens. They turn around, they have all of this money, and they don't even know where the money's going. Fancy gym memberships, you name it. And before you know it, they have nothing. So you have to plan. Plan every penny that you have. You have to still say, I'm going to set aside 10% religiously to pay for your savings and your investments. And that's at least. The next point that the book brings up is knowing and tracking exactly where every penny in your household is going. So people who are prodigious accumulators of wealth, they do. They spend an unbelievable amount of time planning each and every month exactly where their money's going to go. They budget. Yeah, I'll be surprised. You'll be surprised how many people don't even do basic budgets. I was guilty of that for a very long time, not doing budgets. And exactly the reason why is because when you plan, then you know exactly how much money is going into your household. You know how much money is slipping out of your household. You can make adjustments, etc. But when you do not plan, then what eventually happens is, the money is soon gone. And I know one of my areas of weakness does become, for example, eating out. And that's not something I plan for really well. I'm still working on that. And, sometimes you look back and you say, dang, how much money did I really spend on eating out? And what eventually happens is that's serious money that you could have used to invest, which I'm going to show you the beauty of where that money being invested, why that's a very powerful thing to plan. So nonetheless, planning is a real issue that needs to be addressed, and that becomes the energy piece. When it comes to building wealth, you cannot just work your way to wealth. You cannot just say, I have a lot of money and whatever. You have to actually have a plan for that money. One of the reasons why in this country people tend to win the lottery, for example, within 2 years, they're usually broker than they were before they won the lottery, because having money is not the issue here. The issue is not having a plan as to what to do with the money. And so this is why we have to understand that in order to be an accumulator of wealth, you have to have a plan. So the book highlights, once again, paying yourself and making it a priority to understand and do the research and do the work to track exactly where your money is going each and every month. They spend hours planning on this each and every month. One of the things that it highlights is to just go back and review your family's history for the past year. And that's good, because this is money that you've actually done. This is a pattern you're seeing for yourself. So go back and look at every little thing that you spent. Go back through your bank records, your accounting records, your brokerage accounts. Go through anything financial that you have, and look to see exactly what did you spend your money on, and put them into categories and look at the picture overall. The proof will be in the pudding. See if you spent your money, like me, on an ungodly amount of food, and deal with that. See if you spent your money, too much money on the kids, and deal with that, deal with that. See if you're on the right track, and, congratulations, pat yourself on the back and keep up the good work. See if even if you're on the right track, if there's still areas where you can tweak or you're willing to make cuts to make improvements. I talked to you in chapter 2 about how I was willing to get rid of cable because of that, sort of a willingness to make a sacrifice to be able to invest more. So with that in mind, do that research, do that plan, put that energy and that time into building your financial future. The next thing that I want to stress to you is the underachiever wealth. You don't want to be in a position like that, because what the book argues is that unfortunately, it tends to have a negative impact on the kids. Why? What they're finding is that people who are prodigious accumulators of wealth, their children tend to be much better off in the future. So even no matter what kind of career field that they have, they tend to be very disciplined. They tend to live these frugal lifestyles. And because of the good habits that was set and ingrained in them by their parents and their communities, I guess, then what eventually happens is that they too tend to be very successful and prodigious accumulators of wealth in the future. On the other hand, when it comes to the under accumulators of wealth, then they too, their children tend to be horrible in essence, not as people, but when it comes to money in the future, that they've become accustomed to these lifestyles because their parents, in essence, just gave them whatever they wanted because they just spent without a care and a thought in the world, and they just gave them whatever they want, but they really instill in them any sort of habits. And so what happens is that these children become very undisciplined as they get older. They don't become budgeted. And so they don't know how to budget. They don't know how to they consume. They don't know how to set parameters as to and goals as to how they're going to use, certain investments to pay for certain expenses. And so what eventually happens is that they find themselves constantly struggling. And the book even highlights how, especially when it comes to the female children, the parents usually wind up having to supplement their income as a result. And you don't want to do that. One of the greatest joys of being a parent is eventually getting your children to the point where they can become independent and self-sufficient. So you don't want to raise children who's going to wind up needing you forever because, first of all, you ain't better off yourself if you're under accumulated wealth. And two, you always want more for your children than what you've had for yourself. So, and then not only that, they even talked about the family relationships, the dynamics between the siblings, how with the PAWs, the children tend to get along much better. But after the mom and dad, unfortunately is gone, when it comes to the UAWs, the cat fights and soon come about like crazy, that they're fighting amongst themselves over inheritances, and that these once strong relationships are withering and crumbling simply because in the end they're dependent on mom and dad's money for their lifestyles. So ingrain those habits in those children early. Get yourself together so you can get your children together. Now, going back to the next point I was really excited to tell you about is the prodigious accumulator of wealth. So how do we become a prodigious accumulator of wealth? I already told you about paying yourself. So you want to make sure that therefore you can't work your way to wealth. You have to save and invest. So one of the key factors, this chapter, once again, being called time, energy, and money, you have to start early. The earlier you can start, the better you can start. And I'm going to explain to you why. I got this written down just to make sure I get it right. So let's say you're 20 years old and you decide to start investing now. All right, you have a little 2-bit job, so you're not even making much money. And so you basically say, okay, I'm going to start putting aside $100 a month, despite not making much. I'm living in my parents' home, so I really don't have much responsibilities now. I'm going to start putting aside $100 a month. And then you save $100 a month. You had nothing in savings at all. All right, you ain't come from any folk with money, whatever. You had nothing in savings. You decide to save $100 a month now. And then you basically decide to put $100 a month every month until you're 65 years old. So you've been doing this for the last 45 years. At the end of the 45 years, so when you're 65 years old, you would have contributed $54,000, okay? Over your lifetime from 20 to 65, okay? Let's say you, during that time, once you saved that $100 a month, you invested it, right? And you made a 12% return, which is the historic average of the S&P 500, okay? So over the last few decades, when they followed and tracked the S&P 500 averages, it averages to about 12% returns per year. That means some years you make more, some years you make less, but the average is 12% returns. And trust me, the more knowledgeable you become, you can definitely do even more. So with that in mind, you make the 12% return. Guess what you're going to have by the time you become 65 years old? You will have $1.8 million. $1.8 million. That is what we mean by a prodigious accumulator of wealth. So even with your 2-bit job, even with the little bit of savings that you put aside every month, even with the little contribution that you put in, because you gave yourself the benefit of time, all right, then guess what? You now have $1.8 million. Most people are not retiring with that kind of money. So time is your best friend. And let me explain to you the dangers of time. Let's say you don't start in your 20s, you wait till your 30s. I was guilty of waiting till close to my 40s. So I'm going to explain that in a moment. All right. But not guilty. I didn't know much better, but nonetheless, it is what it is. I got to deal with it. Right. When you talk about people waiting until their 30s, I'm going to give you that same number. I didn't know better, or you didn't do better. You were out partying all day long. You didn't want to spend your time and your energy to do the research and invest. You wanted to consume alcohol and partying and clothes and clubbing and whatever else. And so now you wait till you're 30 to get together. So now you save that same thing, $100 a month. You make the same 12% returns. By the time you become 65 years old, so that's only in 35 years, you would have contributed $42,000. So that's $12,000 less than the $54,000 you would have contributed if you had started at year 20. But guess what? So only $12,000 less, right? Guess how much your rate of return is going to be by the time your money is going to be by the time you're ready to retire at 65. All right. So in 35 years, it's only going to be $580,155. All right. So $580,000. So that big of a difference simply because you basically waited 10 years later to invest. All right. And the numbers become much more bleak as you become older, like I did. So the problem becomes then you've got to, as you get older, that doesn't mean that all hope is gone. All hope is gone, that you can't become a paw even at your age. That just means some changes are going to happen. Time is no longer your friend the older you get, and that's just the reality. So this is where your energy, all right, and your income is going to have to compensate for that. So because I started older, I have to contribute more a month, That's going to have to be a reality that you have to do so that you can basically play a little bit more catch up with someone who started earlier. Not only that, I have to spend more energy. I have to go ahead. I can't just be an average investor. I have to start finding ways in which I can truly become knowledgeable to further my chances of getting better percentage rates of returns. So then that way I can turn around and make more money. So for example, if I were to get myself a 15% rate of return with those same numbers, then I could turn around and make, $4 million, as opposed to the $1.8 million. So the point is I have to I have to spend my energy doing that. Warren Buffett, how come he's one of the greatest investors ever? He reads 5 to 6 hours a day. And we're not talking about just trash books, and whatever else. He's reading investor reports. He's reading books that talks about autobiographies. It talks about how other greats have done it. He's reading. And so I know when it comes to the investor reports I invest in stocks, and that's one of the ways I'm building my wealth. And even though I started close to 40 years old, I've planned out my strategy, and I'm executing my strategy. And one of the parts of that strategy is making sure that I become a better than an average investor, which has paid off for me. In my first year, I've made over 24% in returns in stock market investing. Granted, it was a great year across the board when it came to stocks, but I plan to continue that. And so with that in mind, what you want to do is you want to research, read those boring 10Ks and the annual reports, and just go through them. And, you're going to wake up, fall asleep, wake up again, fall asleep. But you got to do that if you want to become truly wealthy. So these are the ways in which time, energy, and money all play the part. And so going back to this, one of the things that the book gave that I thought was really interesting is that when they talked about when you spend, don't only look at it as the cost. So let's say I'm a high income, earner. make $200,000 a year, I decide, hey, I want to buy a $65,000 sports car. Okay, maybe I can afford it. But then let's look at the real cost of that $65,000 sports car. It didn't only just cost me $65,000. $65,000 is approximately a third of my income for the year. So with that in mind, that basically means it's 4 months worth of work for the year. So when I bought this car, not only did I spend this money that I assumed that I had, what I basically said was that I was willing to give up 4 months of my life to pay for this car. And because I bought this car, then in order to make up for that, I have to be willing to put in 4 more months of my life to make up for that. And that's on top of being able to move forward to still stay on track with my savings and my investments, which is problematic. So this is why rich people don't go around buying $65,000 cars. It's the people who think that they're rich or want to pretend that they're rich, want to keep up with the Joneses who are doing that. And to make it more real, because I know a lot of people say, well, I'm not buying the $65,000 car. It's no different than the person making $80,000 buying a $20,000 car. You know, that's a quarter of your wealth. All right. So when you think about that, then you're basically giving up 3 months of your life to pay for a car, of your year, per life to pay for that car. And that's a problem. Well, not per year. You know what I mean? 3 months of your year to pay for that car. And that's significant because the amount of catch up you have to play in order to recover from that financially is mind-blowing. This is one of the reasons why in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, they talks about the cash flow quadrant and how the rich basically uses their assets, money that's making money for them, their investments to pay for their expenses, whereas the poor and the middle class, we use our blood, sweat, and tears. We actually use our labor to pay for our investments. And that's the real damage because time is truthfully the one asset that we'll never get back. Even in the example I showed to you, just told you about a second ago, that the earlier you start, the much better off you'll be, but you can never get back time. You lose $1 today, you can make the dollar back tomorrow, but you can never get that time. And that time is what's crucial to truly building the wealth. So think about that whenever you spend. Think about the person who makes minimum wage, $7 an hour, and they turning around and they're buying a $10 meal. They're going to a restaurant and buying a $20 meal. That's 2 hours of their life that they're now gave up for this meal. How significant is that over time? All right. So these are the decisions that we have to make. Don't just look at the dollars. Look at how much of your life you're spending for these supposed needs and wants that you have. And so once you start looking at it like that, then hopefully that will help you to make wiser decisions to see if something's really worth it to you or not. The next part of the planning is debt reduction. You can't talk about building wealth without first tackling debt if you have it. And contrary to popular belief, there is no such thing as good debt. None whatsoever. Okay? None. Even with businesses, is no such thing as good debt. If you look at their balance sheets and you see, hey, that they actually have a lot more debt than they actually have assets, that's a problem. If you see that, so there is no such thing as good debt, even to build a business. So you want to eliminate debt. Understand that you can't be afraid of debt. Sometimes you can use debt in your favor, but it takes a lot of planning and it takes a lot of discipline and execution to make sure that debt is not getting the best of you. And it could easily happen to anyone or any business, period. So with that in mind, you have to really sit down and plan. If you're in debt, you want to make a plan to how to eliminate it. And we're talking about we're talking about student loans. We're talking about mortgage. We're talking about car notes. We're talking about credit cards, definitely credit cards. And the biggest problem with credit cards, compounding interest, people. Same way I explained to you how interest works when it comes for savings and investing. If you do $100 a month and you make the 12% interest, talk about credit cards carrying a 25% interest rate and you're paying that per year. talk about how quickly that can grow over time. Imagine that. Instead of putting the money to a credit card, put that money to the investing. Stop overspending and therefore using credit card. Put that money to an investment account and watch that compound over month rather than your credit card bill compound year after year and you be in a crap load of trouble. Okay? So with that in mind, that's something you really want to tackle. But before I go there, I'm not a credit expert. I'm not pretending to be. But one thing I do believe, because I've learned from one of my gurus, Alania Kohlberg of Bottom Up Wealth, what I learned is that you always got to do your numbers. And I used to be one of those people that you used to just say, pay off debt, all debt, quickly. But after a while, once I've learned truly the value of playing with the numbers and how even rich people do use debt to their advantage, not just because they want something, how they use it to their advantage, and still coupled with the fact that there is no such thing as good debt. What I do believe now is that some debts are more tolerable than others. What do I mean? Not because of what kind of debt they are, but based on their interest rate. And that's all, their numbers alone. All right. So if I have a mortgage that has a 6% interest rate, for example, and a credit card that has a 25% interest rate, or well, forget the credit card example. Mortgage has a 6% interest rate, and I'm able to make 12% returns in investing per year, which then would be my priority, to pay off the debt, which is a 6% interest rate, or to invest the 12%. Invest the 12% is my priority. Why? That's for me. I can't speak to everybody, but for me. Because in the end, the money that I'm going to make from investing will far outweigh or outpace the money or the interest I'm going to spend in the home from the mortgage. And so with that in mind, the money I can make from investing could easily pay back the money for the investing. And this is what we mean by the rich spending, using their money, their investments to pay for their liabilities, their expenses. So with that in mind, that's from the mindset that I am. Some people just say, no, get rid of the debt under all circumstances. Do you. Whatever helps you to sleep at night, do you. But I've learned to, it's a numbers game, and do whatever makes the most financial sense, period. So just want to put that out there. With that in mind, the biggest things that this chapter exposed is the relationship between time, energy, and money. And you just want to make sure that you are making the best of all three ingredients. That you want to make sure that you are using your money wisely, that you're tracking your money wisely, that wealth is not by accident, that if you want to be wealthy and financially free, you have to plan for that. That takes some sacrifice. And sacrifice is not a bad thing. To be free totally is an awesome thing. But it has rules to it. So you have to understand how to use those rules to your advantage. And in the end, it's not something that's limited. It's truly freeing, because in the end, it's going to be something that's going to help you to sleep at night. Underaccumulators of wealth, they think that they're free with their fancy car and their nice watches and nice suits and whatever else. But in the end, they're sitting up there worried sick as to how they're going to pay for all of that. When are the cards are going to come crumbling? When are the creditors going to come back to take whatever that they own or they drive? So with that in mind, you want to be at the place where no matter how old you are, like I said, I was close to 40, still haven't hit 40, but I'm almost there. And that's when I decided to actually start giving it a try, not a try, to implement it. And already I've seen the fruits of my labor, and I can't wait to, 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line to see where I am. But nonetheless, with this in mind, you want to make sure that you use your time, your energy, and your money as wisely as possible. That's it for now. I would love to hear your thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, complaints, because I love to debate. So please leave them at the bottom, and I'll catch you with chapter 4. Take care.